Gents?
Don't pitch it too far after the meeting.
Why is that?
So you really think you're gonna get people to come in to talk about sewer connections?
We're on,
It wouldn't take a good.
we're live.
Counselor?
How are you, Peter?
How are you?
Okay.
Look at all this stuff.
Wow, we clean up pretty good.
Yeah, we do.
Not bad. Not bad.
We'll need to get it opened up at 5:15.
Oh, happy birthday, Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay.
Your birthday?
It was my birthday yesterday. Yeah.
You need the gavel, Counselor?
Oh, yes, I love to hit the
Stocked up
gavel.
on the topic, didn't we?
System power.
Huh? That's not.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Knocked it over. I can't believe it's so bad.
Breakable.
And we got the verification that we're 100% verified. We got that
Cool.
verification. We already knew we were getting
Yeah, that's,
but I'm trying to get a hold of Sierra Club to see if we can do this as the seventh city in the country to have that.
wonderful. Perfect. Couldn't be better.
At this point, I'd like to call to order the December meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. Start with roll call.
Counselor Kelly,
Here.
Counselor Moore,
Here.
Mayor Reed, Counselor Armstrong,
Here.
Counselor Gibbs,
Here.
Counselor Ensel,
Here.
Counselor McFarland,
Here.
Okay, we don't have much of an agenda today, so I'll just tell you, what I'd like to do is go ahead and move the items to today's regular meeting agenda, and then reserve the rest of our time before 5:15 for a work session to discuss anything on the agenda. Does that meet with everyone's approval?
Sure.
Okay.
It's your show.
I will say that in January, we'll call on Richard Marks and his department to help us with year-end estimates, so we can know how 2019 turned out, and also to introduce the new council to the 5-year plan. So something to look forward to in January. But I'd like to entertain a motion to move our agenda items from this committee to the regular council meeting. Someone like to make that motion?
So moved.
All, roll call?
Counselor Kelly,
Yes.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor Reed,
Yes.
Okay. Is there any old business for the finance committee? Any new business for the finance committee?
There is a piece of new business, doesn't have any financial impact, but it has to do with the grant that we're working on closing down, that we're required to have a public hearing for. So let me read it out. Resolved, the Common Council approves that the City of Plattsburgh will hold a public hearing on Thursday, January 9th, 2020 at 5 p.m. in the Common Council chambers of City Hall for the purpose of hearing public comments on the performance of the City of Plattsburgh's current Community Development Block Grant Project, New York State CDBG Project 927 PF 141-16 Lakeview Towers Elevator with a funding amount of $300,000. So if we can accept this resolution in our meeting, we can then put it on the agenda for new business in the subsequent meeting to call that public hearing.
For tonight? Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Do a first and second.
So I'll move.
Second?
Counselor Kelly,
Yes.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor Reed,
Yes. And that's all I have.
Any other new business? Okay, I'll make a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting.
A second?
Counselor Kelly,
Yes.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor Reed,
Yes. So tonight, at 5 o'clock, we'll be conducting a public hearing for the sewer local law that you saw a couple of weeks ago. At 5:15, we'll be seeing a demonstration of OpenGov. So in the meantime, we can conduct a work session, deal with anything on the agenda that you would like to see. And I do believe there's a request for an executive session to discuss a matter involving a particular person.
I'll move to go into the executive session.
Moved by Councilor McFarland, second by Councilor Ansel. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed.
how are you? You ready?
$300 million. It's nice he sends that to me 5 days before Christmas when he knows.
Yeah,
We have to have it done for 30 days.
that's Charlie.
That's Charlie.
Yeah. He's the, I'm the one who painted the neck with leather shoes at small cities, cash accounts. Mom, we've been using it for years. No, your application said you create a new account, so we have to use that one. That's when we just had.
Are you sending a word? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
so we just had this little.
So,
It's
so,
like
yeah.
2 or 3 days to
Are you sending him the word?
pull that out, isn't it?
Yeah, we have
Notice the
started
public hearing that
checkbook.
you're doing?
What?
You're doing the elevator notice of public hearing?
Yeah. Bottom of that, because they use it under the bank.
We're gonna do it, we're gonna do it.
Because we were using.
I was gonna say, do you want us to, send you the word you use for the public hearing?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Once it gets approved.
We had that account, he says, no, since your application.
Just wait till it gets
Just
approved
give her a
first.
sample, because she puts on there about that.
And the
Yeah,
cash is
I
there,
already gave it to her.
we couldn't print checks from it, because didn't even know
And then you
about
can
the
send it to
sales.
her.
She had
Okay,
it
right.
filed.
It's even easier for
But
me.
you don't have
We
the
had a
word
week
because
to
I
get
don't have it.
Munis
Oh, I have it.
convert
We can have it
check
tomorrow morning
format.
and get back to you.
But
Well, I just need the person in the morning, so I just have to go public check.
what, what's the big deal? Very important.
Sorry, Mike can't get in. Sorry. They lost you out.
You're not part of the conversation. Get out of here, buddy.
So did you send him that pile of crap last Friday?
Which pile of crap?
Stuff you said had to be in by Friday at 4
Yeah.
p.m. Gave you the high.
Yeah, give me that and send everything, and then I got his response about an hour ago. I'm thinking to myself, well, people
No.
are here, they're gonna have to announce that hearing at this meeting.
All our families nearby.
Really shouldn't have to lie.
No, you really shouldn't. So what's the public hearing for? They're not, how did
To discuss the performance of the project, there's one meeting up front to talk about the application, and then there's
But they weren't in there. They went to
another
the mayor's office.
Oh,
Usually
hearing you
in
have
there,
to
so
have
that's what I
during the
thought they were.
project.
so you went to the bathroom,
Public
and came out.
comment on how it's progressing.
So that was. You didn't have the keys to your project for the first one, and during the project for the second.
Yeah, so technically we're still during the
Come on,
project.
come on, Rick.
Because we haven't had a meeting. Elevators in, money spent, admin fees transferred, everything's done.
watch it on the video.
She won't watch it on video either. Well, if he complains about vaccine, it's not going back to
Yeah.
people to warn him, no activity.
He didn't say anything about that?
Yeah, sure, she's
Yeah.
all, it counts for the 300 grand.
Yeah, we have it already.
What's
It's
that?
all done, all done.
I answered all.
Got your voice cut, that's your one.
Yeah, I saw it.
Joe was a great man at that.
Yeah.
What's
I
that?
never had a lot of questions for you, but you weren't here, so I answered.
Yeah, right.
I didn't really care. Neither did I, so.
Pardon, sorry, excuse me, pardon.
I'm just resting. Before I go back.
Huh?
You did that? Nice boots. Yeah, that's mine.
Yes.
Of course, they're not leopard skin either.
No, mine.
Didn't Wayne have on leopard boots the other day or something?
Yeah, she has like those
Yeah, we did that.
pattern. Yeah, there's definitely a collection of boots
I
right
don't know if she notices what the boot was on. She made fun of my CLMs a couple of weeks ago.
It's a seal on.
Chow lady boot.
What?
Are we live here?
Yes. Your wife is gonna be texting you.
Me too, John, so take it
She
easy.
needed to hang with her, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Remember Chow had those little black boots?
Yeah.
Nobody found it. I was wearing something like that. She and Joe, my wife, have been giving me a hard time about wearing baby boots.
Oh, where are you?
What?
Snake food.
I'm breaking those
You gotta
out.
bring.
Those are warm weather boots. What?
Yeah, I don't know, you're.
Dementia's off, isn't it? Actually, it's Matt Cowdery. You watch Boston Legal?
You notice Chief sitting way over there.
That's hysterical. Then it changed.
Stay away from all that. That boob talk.
It's just full of something.
I don't like sitting next to a door.
Oh, yeah.
Going off the rails.
That's right.
It's a Matt
Well,
Cowdery.
you're used to that.
Matt
It's all
Cowdery.
your training, right?
All important.
I don't respond to the,
Yeah,
You
whenever
do,
you're
and you know
it
it.
stays in the nail.
You know exactly what this means.
and I'm not going.
It's not just mints, it's chocolate.
You look to the
There's a
sides.
ton of
What?
jokes.
Actually, it's chocolate.
Yeah. Joe, right, Joe's the chocolate thing.
I can't go in there, I can't hear. I'll be his, what is it called? Yeah. My proxy. GEIS here, transcript. Yeah.
Read that before bed to be sure that you fall right to sleep.
Yeah. I'm out within 2 days. I think this is working then. Oh, I thought he was talking to you. Forgot that was Chris.
Which at some point, were there covers on the LED lights, you know, those plastic things they put over that scatter the light?
There used to be.
Listen, look, it's,
I was up in the office and it was late and I heard a crash in the other room. I go over and the plastic cover on the overhead lights had fallen off and landed right on his desk. Yeah.
that's thanks to Joe's office.
It would be CLV. I guess it would be CLV's coverage.
So next time you go, don't say
Yeah,
French.
they don't buy replacements.
Right?
Yeah.
Sweet enough, yeah?
No. Surprised they have them all working.
Well, that's a high visibility room. Same reason why DPW shut the city hall first.
That's another road already into the street.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. No loafers today?
Loafers. We're up here, we're in the Aussies today, styling.
I thought you always did your best footwork in your loafers.
Kenzie,
Are you
you should
suggesting that I might be
stop
a
chocolate.
little light
John,
on my feet? No, wearing my loafers.
tell me if it's chocolate. Kenzie didn't get any chocolate. I can't find.
See, that's,
These aren't chocolate, they're,
Oh, well, he had chocolate.
Yesterday, the day
Rich.
before.
I
Yeah.
had chocolate too.
he's not sure. If I know John, he's gonna keep the chocolate for himself.
5 degrees.
No way.
Is that what
Asked you to have a lunch since Wednesday. Ladies will love it. You get a great discussion, right, story, the best you're gonna sit.
Today was so disappointing. I gotta play more than once a week.
All I have to do is go get the ice and sodas. So I have easy pleasure. So we have taco ring, we have meatballs, all of sausage. Peppers and onions. Water, chestnuts, wow. 2 pounds of shrimp, oh my God. Been eating them all day for 2 days.
He was new for a while, so we're going easy on him.
Went home last night and said, what do you want for dinner?
Oh, yeah.
Nothing.
The rest of us, yeah. I was like, I don't know. Sorry, I didn't know where.
If I don't hustle back on defense, they throw the ball down to me. Well, you probably haven't been here for a while. He's yelling about everything. But usually when they throw it down, I go way out to the wing, I shoot a 3-point bank shot. That's fair.
Difficulty shot.
I mean, these guys should stay back on defense instead of having 4-on-3 against the old guys.
Pulling the basket maker, right?
Hey, you can make the shots. Yeah, even though we're gonna hang him.
Special Olympics number 6'9" center down there for basket. I'm gonna throw out the basket.
Share.
You have to face up dealing with people like that.
I'm sure John didn't offer it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you give me 1 minute and,
Whoa.
Yeah, usually executive
Good
session.
job.
Have your something.
Is he bitter about it?
He wants to be my balance. Playing hard to get.
Is that the grant for the details?
What's a sewer?
Is that where they call it? What's a sewer?
Oh, no, yeah, I think that was, I'm not sure.
Street balls are played after basketball. Throw in, first guy throwing the next local off. Pick one for the team here.
Take it, Bob.
Pick one for the team here. Giving away for all that.
So that's,
You can double check.
that's not the water law. That'll be the bench.
That's gonna go nuclear. Nuclear, sorry.
Nuclear.
Good stuff, huh?
Silent.
you don't think that's gonna fly under the radar completely? Not anymore?
Excuse me. At some point, we gotta hit like outrage fatigue among the public. City staff.
It's gotta be a couple of heights.
We need Kevin to come more meetings.
That's what we need.
Right, John?
What?
We need Kevin to come more meetings.
They never get rid of cheese.
Nice guy, that's what he said. Oh,
And,
that was just priceless.
so Jackson was always first. No, Kirk was always been first. Jackson was like, because he was at the end. He wanted the chance to go over.
This is both never mattered.
Yeah. Sometimes, no, it wouldn't, would it? Well, it would have if there was a three.
So Rich, you giving us a presentation?
Now, the mayor's driving that, because he's written most of the story and put most of the graphs on the side. He's doing it.
If this was Jeopardy, we would say.
No,
Make sure
spot
the
lights at the
receivers-
bottom.
What is it for?
Huh?
Oh, no, I saw.
Yeah.
Okay, can we make four there?
Yeah.
Oh,
We should be able to.
because, maybe would like to put that on as the
I
fourth
mean, you
spot.
could also replace that with one of the others,
We
one of the
can
other.
do that.
Okay. So I'll work on, I'll see the fourth.
Thanks.
It should be, I don't see whether.
Well, I tried to do it today, but it wouldn't be able to add that fourth. So I have that link in there.
Well, we probably have to create a whole new fourth one on like, in the module before you try to add it to the page.
Is this the website or the?
The-
Well, I have it already on the website, you can click on it, it's on our website now. But the mayor would like to have it at the bottom, you know, where you scroll down the three spotlights, and then it's just a one, then you can leave this up, embed it in your, what's it called? Embedding it in the website, so all that people would see would just be that, they click on it, and they look at it. So it's, then you don't have to go into something.
We're having a meeting on the second, or is the next council meeting on the ninth?
Well, the next meeting is second, we have our organizational meeting and then our regular meeting. Is that what you meant?
So when are you releasing the agenda for the second meeting?
On the 30th.
On the 30th?
You'll be in what, Bahamas or something? We'll still be working.
Close enough.
Yeah, no, well, I'll do that 30th before I leave.
Okay. Yeah, my sister sent me a picture of my niece this morning going to school in like a light jacket. I'm like, ah,
Yeah.
damn it.
It was only like 14, feels like this morning.
Oh, yeah.
Denise is just not gonna build character. Yes. Character deficient.
No, she's just gonna be a happy little Laura, skipping through life.
It's no hardship is.
Just like my sister.
Oh. It's coming out.
There
we go. Always was mom's favorite. Different shots right for Christmas.
They called out to a firestorm at 4 o'clock in the morning. West of AM. I didn't think it was gonna be that cold. Gonna be that cold.
Yeah, it wasn't that cold.
Half a day.
What happened the days where it was 10 below, morning, noon, and night, between January 10th and February 10th?
Yeah.
That's coming.
We've had winters like that.
Oh, yeah. You got 2 or 3
Never
weeks.
never got above 10 below for a whole month. Sun's out. But hey, 10 below. That's without the wind. That's brutal.
So over the course of my life, I plan on following the effects of global warming further north. Like every 10 years, move another 200-300 miles towards the pole.
Yeah. January 26th, 25 below, somebody said, what's global warming all about?
John Stewart used to rail against it. Just because it's cold outside today, where you are, does not mean it's not getting hotter everywhere else.
Oh, okay.
It's gonna be real hard not mentioning something about a piece of my dad. So yeah, he's a Fox News junkie. He's way down the rabbit hole.
So depends on what the definition of is, you know, and it's not, oh, crap. What's that?
We're doing stuff.
Remember when the whole thing's happening and the STAR report came out, all the different details about sexual encounters? Saturday Night Live had, the guy Daryl Hannah, he was sitting there behind the Oval Office with the STAR report, he's like, it's just like that in class, and he goes, that's why.
So, this is what I think they can have, mother-in-law apartment, and they move into the mother-in-law apartment, rent out their place.
On the mayor's side?
Next a little bit for a long time. The age still up?
Kevin got more press about that than anybody.
Oh, noisy days from. Yeah, they need college. Haven't gotten over to. One fact is
His basic comment was, this just smells bad. Priceless. I love it.
Don't encourage him.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Went down the MLD site today, it was about 3 or 4 feet of water from the bottom of that hole.
Yeah, see, I didn't know that at the time.
There's like 4 or 5 feet of water in the other building. The last time I checked, wasn't actually keeping that building frozen. It's only gonna last so long. They did, so now they gotta pump it all out. Using the electricity from one.
Maybe not having a lot of fun. I bet you were thinking about it.
That's a nice picture, huh?
You're so
I'm gonna
photogenic.
put it on my wall. What'd you say? What did you say?
I said you're so
Oh,
photogenic.
stop.
And Rochelle too.
We're returning from executive session. We're discussing a matter involving an individual person. No decisions are made during an executive session. And I'd like to now conduct a public hearing. I think this means 5 p.m. A common council change. The city of Plattsburgh is holding a public hearing to hear public comment on a proposed local law P7, a local law amending and restating in its entirety chapter 278, article 7, section 48, subsection C of the city code for the city of Plattsburgh, establishing an associated schedule of rates for sewer connections in the city of Plattsburgh. And if any members of the public like to please come and comment on this public hearing, you've got a sign up sheet right here. I think there's copies of the law just outside the door there as well. Seeing no public comments, I'll then close the hearing. We'll continue on with our work session today. That we can now have an opportunity to have a little more elaborate discussion on any items on the agenda tonight. I think we've got a pretty full agenda, although a fair number of these are relatively routine matters.
I wouldn't mind discussing that local law.
Sure.
Is John here? Yeah, John is here. So John, basically what I understand is this, it kind of, it's anticipating a lot of long-term contracts ended, and one of the aspects of it is it's putting our industrial users on a pay scale, is that correct? It's not a pay scale, it sets the price,
Yeah.
anyone over 3 million.
So we have 3 remaining, what we call major user agreements. They were sewer service contracts from the early 1970s. Georgia Pacific, Pactiv, and SUNY. Those agreements expire at the end of this year, so we need some kind of mechanism to continue billing them. It's been decided that a local law is the appropriate mechanism for doing that. And corresponding question then is, what should that rate be? So this local law creates 2 new user classes. One is called an industrial user class with a rate of $1.71 per 1,000 gallons. It also creates a high-flow non-industrial user class that starts off at a rate of $1.71 a 1,000, but then on July 1st goes to $3.99 a 1,000. Right now, based on the data I've seen, Georgia Pacific and Pactiv would both fall within the industrial user class, and SUNY would fall into the high-flow non-industrial user class.
And the industrial user class is set at, if I have the local law in front of me, is 171 per 1,000 gallons, and it stays there. To change that rate, there'd have to be a new local law in the future.
Correct.
And those are basically the only changes that this law makes.
Yes.
And there will be, you anticipate they will be the only 3 users that will be impacted by this?
Right now, based on the data I've seen, yes. Now, if somebody else, new user comes to town and meets the requirements of the industrial user category or the high-flow non-industrial user category, that would apply to them also. So it's not really, doesn't really single them out, but it is a category that they fall into that's open to anybody that meets the requirements.
And I remember, I think you said at one point that 171 is basically what Pactiv and Georgia Pacific are paying right now.
Correct.
And the contract they were on from the early 70s, that I guess imagine increased rates over that amount of time, or was it 171 back?
It was a really kind of complicated algorithm that was in the contract, and the way the contract's set up is there's 2 main components. There's an annual operation and maintenance fee that they pay, and basically a capital project fee. The annual operation and maintenance fees were calculated with this 20-page spreadsheet that takes a look at how much flow each one of them discharges, how much BOD, how much suspended solids. It runs a calculation of their pro rata share for each one of those components, compares it to what the total discharge of the city is, including all of the users, and then breaks down all of the money that we spend. Every dollar is broken into a flow, BOD, and suspended solids component. It all gets broken down into unit cost and then recalculated back up into an annual bill. So it's just really, from my perspective, it's a really complicated, what I call algorithm or computation on the operation and maintenance side. And it changes every year because the users might discharge more flow and BOD and solids one year than they do another year. And that would get played off somebody else's discharge. But that's just the operation and maintenance component. The capital component can change every year based on how many capital dollars we spend. But the pro rata shares are based on predetermined shares for flow, BOD, and suspended solids. So that gets put into a whole nother calculation. So 50 years ago almost, when these contracts were developed, it was when the wastewater plant was first being built. That might have made sense then. We don't think it makes, at least I don't think it makes sense now. Rich can probably attest to the complexity of what it does to our budgeting. When you look at the wastewater treatment plant budget, every dollar is broken down into flow, BOD, and solids. So if you really want to know what we're spending on payroll, you have to take the flow component, the BOD component, the suspended solids component, add them all up to see the real number. So this is basically simplifying the way the costs are computed and assessed.
And so does this lead to a lower administrative cost for the water treatment plant?
It's going to lead to less workload on us and probably finance, so we can redeploy those assets in hopefully a more productive way.
So yes.
So you asked me if it was going to lower costs. Lower cost, not necessarily.
Okay.
But it is going to make us more productive. And if a situation arises later on with the retirement or other reductions in in the amount of work that needs to be done. There's the potential to save some money, but right out of the gate, I'd say no. But there's definitely the potential to do more with existing staff and not drive ourselves as crazy going through these 20-page spreadsheet calculations every month.
John, if I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a grace or introductory period for these rates?
Not in the industrial user class. In the high flow non-industrial user class, which SUNY would fall into, it stays at $1.71 through July 1st and goes to $3.99.
And they've been,
Yeah.
the three entities that you spoke of have been told that this may
Correct.
indeed be.
Yeah, yeah.
And what was SUNY paying under their contract?
They're probably at like between $1.50 and $1.70 a thousand.
So their water rate is actually going up.
Wastewater rate,
Wastewater rate is going up significantly.
correct. The rate per thousand. Now, if they decrease the number of gallons that they discharge, their bill will come down accordingly, but the rate per thousand is going up.
Now, I know the rate, but then the rate after it goes up on July 1st, 2020 is staying stagnant at $3.99.
Until such a time as any that there's a new local law passed adjusting those rates.
And I guess my question to you is, what do you anticipate the longevity of this law? Do you see it needed to be updated every 10 years? Or will these rates, do you think, looking at the projections of the wastewater treatment plant, be able to last for another 50 years as those contracts were? Or?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but there hasn't been a rate adjustment on the sewer side, I think in 10 years. My preference with sewer rates and water rates is to do analysis every year and make what I call a routine, reasonable rate adjustment. It's better to do 0.5%, 1%, 1.5% every year than wait 5 years or 10 years and do 15%. We've kind of gotten away from that, especially on the sewer side, because the sewer fund's been pretty healthy. There's been a significant fund balance, and revenues have exceeded expense. So when we've looked at it internally each year, there hasn't been a pressing need to make an adjustment to those rates. The pressing need right now is these contracts are expiring. We need a mechanism to be able to continue to bill these users.
So I guess my question is, do you anticipate like next year having the local law P7 of 2020 adjusting the industrial rate from 171 per 1,000 gallons?
It's possible. One of the
to
things we need to look
176?
at very early next year is the $1.71 a thousand fair all the way around? We started into those discussions, having completed those. There's a lot of different perspectives on maybe what that rate should be. If you look at the existing rate structure, it's a lot higher than the $1.71 a thousand. But most folks that fall into the existing rate structure are very low flow users. It's residential homes, a couple 300 gallons a month maybe, or a day, as opposed to 1 million gallons a day. Some people are of the philosophy that as you use more and more waste treatment service, your unit cost should go down. Other people look at the other way and think it should escalate. They're both valid approaches and legitimate approaches, but they need to be looked at in the context of what's specifically going on in your system, in your fund. As far as next year goes, though, we do need to get into discussions and with the council and with the users and decide what we think is the fair rate. Maybe the same rate, we may leave it alone. It might be something lower, might be something higher. We'll look at some benchmarks for comparison. We'll do an analysis of the fund, how healthy it is, and factor that and all the other considerations into trying to come to some kind of reasonable determination.
So it's almost like this is a stopgap measure to make sure that we have a mechanism in place to charge in light of these contracts becoming terminated. However, it's the prelude to a much larger discussion.
Yeah, to an extent, it's a stopgap measure. It's to provide this mechanism. And then, to get into these discussions about, what should the rate be? And again, the rate was calculated pretty much to keep them where they're at annually with their total payments, understanding that they've got budgets that might already be in place. SUNY's budgets runs, I think, June, July, so that's why we started them at the $1.71, and they have some time to budget for this increase and all that. So, so from a mechanism perspective, I guess you could characterize it as stopgap. we do need something. And local law really seems like the best way to go, certainly from our perspective. So,
There is also one pretty high volume user, the town of Plattsburgh. Can you describe a little bit?
yeah, we actually have a contract with the town of Plattsburgh that's been in force 10 years or so. It's a 33-year deal. And it sets the rates per thousand for 33 years. The rate that they pay right now is $2.71 a thousand. So when you start looking at benchmarks, that would be one benchmark to look at and say, okay, where do these other users fit in the context of that benchmark that we have in the terms of at least from a fairness perspective. Excuse me. So that would be a good place to start. Look at what our residential people are paying, some of the larger commercial folks, some of the smaller industrial folks that might not fall into this high category. Look at the health of the fund, what other capital costs might be coming in the future, and roll that all into the analysis and decide, all right, what do we think the rate should be? Then a question would become, all right, if let's say we think the rate should be 50 cents a thousand higher. Is that something that we want to implement right away, or is it something we want to phase in over a period of time?
Well, thank you, John.
Cool. You're welcome.
That's
Thanks
an
for
answer
asking.
to my questions.
It's one of my two favorite subjects.
The other being water?
Thank you. Any other items you'd like to have a little bit longer discussion? Oh, it's time for our Open Gov demonstration then. I and I'm sure Councillor Armstrong have been looking forward to this for probably a year and a half now. You know some of the history of this. This is something that Councillor Armstrong through her committee has been advocating for an awful long time. We looked at it very closely. We had a little bit of sticker shock at first in that the preferred platform seemed to be quite a bit more expensive than our preferred point. To our gratification, they ended up dropping that price point down by about 3/4 to something like $16,000 per year, I think.
It was a different package though, too.
It's
That
reduced
was it.
package.
Yeah.
It's more the budgeting stuff that we're really focusing on, but not the entire package of
Exactly.
services.
So it was
So-
comparable to that other offer in that respect.
So we had an intern and a number of people in Richard's office working on this for the last probably 3 months, and we're now ready to show you this, and this is actually live now, if I can make sure it's working.
Uh-oh. Need a mouse pad?
There it is.
Okay.
Okay, so the public will see this page here, this is the stories we tell. In each one of them, we've identified a little bit of a narrative underneath them to explain what these charts will tell you, and I'm going to show you how to manipulate them in just a moment and get drilled down for greater detail. And obviously this is a work in progress. Consider maybe a beta version. These numbers are actually quite current. The numbers were revised just a couple of days ago. The Richard's office established a charter of accounts. In the future, those chart of accounts will go from OpenGov right into Munis and pull the data out on a day-to-day, daily basis. We're not quite doing that full integration yet, so it's still in beta, but by January, by next month, it will be fully operational. But this data is current as of just a couple of days ago.
Last
On Monday.
last week's
Okay.
payments.
So we've got some of the high-level things that people are most concerned about, the revenue versus expenses for different months of the year. And as you see, as I hover across different items here, it'll show you where revenue and expenses are matching up. Over here, we have our expenses budget versus actual. And this is citywide. We're going to drill down to the general fund, which we're often looking at more closely because that's the one that identifies property taxes. But we've spent about $52.465 million so far, and that can't quite read. That's a little bit small, but judging by the blue here, that says that we haven't hit our total budget yet, so we still got a little bit to go. It looks like, since we got more than 1/12 to go, but we've already got 11 months of data in here, we're gonna come in below expense. I'll show you more details on that in a second. And the same thing with the revenue, shows you where we're tracking with our revenue goal of $55 million. Go farther down, for instance, looking at public safety, where they stand updated most recently on their budgets. Here we broke it down into fire and police, and you can see by the red, that tells us that fire is actually over their budget already by this time this year, whereas police still has a little way to go. It looks like, judging by the gap in this diagram here, police might be about on budget by the end of the year. Farther down yet, here's now the general fund. You can hover and see what the general fund revenue has been each year. And we've got about 4 years back. We're gonna go about 10 years back once we have this fully populated. And then how this revenue is spent. So you can look at the various items. If you're interested in drilling down and finding out a little bit more about, well, what's under employee benefits, et cetera, if we click on any of these items as we go through, it will, in the final version, take us to additional information. You know, 1 or 2 diagrams with more detail. My mouse is acting up again. There we go.
Try this paper. Here, you're over the left.
I think it's a weak battery actually, because I'm just doing the scrolling button, it's not working now. Maybe we'll try to go right up to the console.
And this is a link right from the main
I'll
site.
show you
Yeah.
that too, where the public can find all this information. It's right on our main website.
It's in the menu of our main page, I believe.
So for instance, drilling down, whoops. I don't know why the password is.
You just need to go up and get that tab, I think.
Hmm?
Don't you just need to go get the tab up top?
Do you have a password that gets in here?
When I used it today, it was fine on the side.
There we go.
How if you just stay by me, we'll just see what we can get without putting a password in.
In the, there, whatever that was fine.
Okay. So you'll be able to drill down a little bit farther. All the counselors will be able to drill down a little bit farther as well. Here's another one you asked for, overtime by different departments. This is the combined overtime. And for instance, this first item I believe is public safety. The next is home and community, which includes DPW, transportation, etc. And this is just the storylines we make available on our main site. We can actually go in and do additional reports in more detail by generating some specialized reports, like where we are budget versus actual at a given time of the year, etc. So we just tried to construct this main page for all the things that the council most commonly asks us to produce. So let us know what additional functionality you want there, and I'm sure we can integrate that in as well. I'm confident this is going to be a pretty handy tool. I wish I could get into my user here and my password here and show you.
Because
some of
that's for public consumption, what we're seeing right there on the
Right.
website, but then there are other functions that council will be able to access by using their
Password,
Password.
email.
Yeah, actually, if I put my computer in there, I'll be able to go right in. I'll be able to use an HDMI.
Colin, I know my city username and password, if you want me to put that in, think it'll help.
Okay, yeah, that'll work. Okay, that's working now. Okay, so this is more details, for instance, monthly budgets to actual. And again, as the public hovers over each one of these items, they can get additional detail. This is contractual expenses, personal services, employee benefits, et cetera, by month, compared to the budget. And as you can see, the budget is way up here, and we're down here already partly into December, so that's why we're optimistic that once all the finances close this year, we're gonna be left with probably a larger surplus this year than we even anticipated, and that's to the credit of the department heads that have been doing an incredible job in keeping costs down. Below is a table of expenses that you can follow in more precise detail. You can change this graph to be different. You can instead have, line charts or stack charts. That's why I find the bar charts most helpful, but pie charts are pretty useful as well. Over here, for instance, if we want to drill down to look at just the police department, et cetera, we could. It's commonly asked question. The fire department, we've got that data there, and as I said earlier, you can see that the December actuals are a little bit ahead of budget, so we're exceeding that budget here. Let's see if this comes up. This is a more elaborate budget versus actual. Doesn't look at that much.
Give me that coffee.
Okay, well, I think you get the picture. So play with that a little bit. I encourage the public to go to their public page and play with that. Well, if you'd like to know where to find it, go to our main website. And we've actually tried to put this 5,000 different places on our main website because it's often hard to find things with so much information coming at you. But on this left-hand corner, if you go to OpenGov, that will take you to my statement, and then if you go down here, click here to view, it'll take you right into OpenGov as you saw a moment ago. You can do it from here. Let's see where else we can do it, right from the bottom. Okay, we're going to put it in one of these special boxes down here that we reserve for very current items that are of particular public importance, like the DRI public engagement summary, or the new effort to encourage as many of you to pay your bills online for NLD, or the draft generic impact statement, all the really critical, most timely things you can find right down here. We're gonna put a link to OpenGov down there as well. And then finally, we keep all our press releases in here, and we did a short press release yesterday on OpenGov, so you'd be able to access through information you'll find in there as well. So please go and try it out, play with it a little bit. Again, we're not going to have full integration for another month, but at this point, we're confident that the information is accurate. We just want to come up with additional avenues to present that information to the public. Any questions you may have? Richard, do you want to comment a little bit on your experience with it? Richard and I have been working as closely together through this.
Yeah, right now, we just have history upload back to 16, and we have the budget for 2020 there. And it's not integrated. We're not live with integration daily update. These are just flat files that we've sent so that they can load summary data. So you can't drill down very far in this to get to, say, different levels of types of expenses within contractual services or employee benefits or personal services.
Do you plan on having some sort of schedule, Richard? Do you plan on having some sort of schedule, like where it will be updated every 2 weeks, every month? I don't know.
It'll be daily,
It's going to be updated daily.
so we don't have to worry about running it. It's a batch process that we can automatically set up, and they'll just go in and grab the data every day,
Great.
probably after the end of the day. So it'll be as current as the last posting in June.
Great.
The other two things that we want to incorporate, we think are pretty important, is the council very often asks, what's the business case for a particular department? How is a particular department doing? And the only thing we really are missing here, because Munis doesn't track the information that way, is your legacy costs for past employees, which we continue to pay their health care benefits. Now, there's two approaches. We could either treat the legacy costs within a department's budget for the past employees, or we could try to anticipate what their current employees are gonna cost us someday and do some sort of elaborate calculation. So we're going to include that so you can see what some of the costs of operating department are that end up being represented somewhere else in the general fund. Now you'll be able to see them right in that department fund. Another example is the principal interest payments on capital improvements for a particular department. Right now, they're in the general fund budget if they're a general fund enterprise, but they're not in this particular department budget. But the cost to run a department includes the various capital improvements and all that sort of stuff. So we're figuring out a way to incorporate that into the public's presentations so they can better understand all the various true costs of running a department. Munis doesn't tend to function in that way, but we can create some sub-accounts in Munis, so then OpenGov can draw the information out in the way that's gonna most make sense to the public. And that's the real advantage of this platform, is it's really designed for the kinds of questions the public needs to know, rather than the way that the accountants running a city need to operate.
I have a question. I remember one of the things when we were first talking about OpenGov is that it can lead to efficiencies, not just on viewing the data, but as data input. I think we talked about how DPW, they will like add things in on their little device, but then at the end of the day, they each need to spend like 20 to 30 minutes taking data from one and putting it into another sort of system that can then be sent to Richard.
Who have to do it again, but.
Okay.
We don't have the manpower feature or the budgeting feature.
Yeah, I know right now we scaled it down.
That would track the cost from 18,000 up to 50,000.
Okay.
Right.
But nonetheless, I think we can still get some of those efficiencies in standardizing timekeeping and reporting, so there's not a lot of re-entry. And the Chamberlain and I both feel equally strongly in putting some of these systems in place. So right now, we have to literally re-enter pieces of information as they go from one entity to another entity. So we can do that within Munis. There's the facilities within Munis to do this. So we believe we can also tap some of the Munis facilities better. And whatever we do in Munis is then automatically incorporated into OpenGov.
Perfect.
So it's pretty exciting. I don't know if many towns, or many cities our size have been employing this. I think cities much more sophisticated than ours, maybe. I'm pretty proud of our team in putting this together, and us and having the sense to do this and create this avenue of information for the public as well. Any other questions? So thank you for your committee for being so persevering on making sure we adopt this new
With
technology.
help of finance. Finance was in on it, so.
And I should
Good
mention
job.
that too, you asked about how far back the data will go. We want to go back 10 years, but remember, we're also looking 10 years into the future on our 5 and 10-year planning instruments. So this instrument and the Strategic Planning Committee, they really do work to help set the goals and objectives that are then engaged with the Finance Committee. There's a real good connection between the two. Seeing no other questions, how about if we begin tonight's meeting then? Let's begin tonight's meeting of the Common Council with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Find my agenda. So just a few comments today. Oh, I'm sorry, roll call.
Mayor Reed,
Present.
Counselor Armstrong,
Here.
Counselor Kelly,
Here.
Counselor Gibbs.
Here.
Counselor Ensel.
Here.
Counselor McFarland,
Here.
Counselor Moore.
Here.
Later on in the meeting, we'll be obviously losing a couple of counselors today. It's their last day after I've served with you for 3 years now. And we'll be inviting another counselor to be joining us at the end of the meeting too. Other things that have happened this week, it's been a very exciting day for the groups that have been working on grants. This week, we were announcing $3.16 million of additional grants. That includes the Harborside Master Plan was approved today as part of the CFA, and the Climate Smart Communities Greenhouse Gas Inventory was approved. An illicit discharge and detection elimination study that is helping Mr. Rafa do more remote detection of his system was approved, and a $3 million water infrastructure grant as part of his $19 million water and wastewater modernization that he's been working on was also approved. I went down to the former MLD location today. One building is now gone. They're doing abatement in another building. I think that will start being demolished very soon. And then the third major building after that is starting to really open up down there. If there's one theme of these grants and the MLD work and the declaration from the state of New York that the city of Plattsburgh is now 100% sustainable energy, 95% from hydroelectric and 5% from wind. This was a declaration based on our 2018 data as well, so we're officially a sustainable energy community. And Sierra Club reports that only 6 cities in the entire country are 100% electricity sustainable, so we'll be the 7th. I'm in contact with Sierra Club to get that declaration as well. And we're a little bit different than the other 6 in that we also heat with electricity. So most all of our energy, not just our electrical energy, but our heating energy in the city is from a sustainable source because we heat with electricity and most other communities don't. Really the only strong negative effect we have on greenhouse gases is the use of our vehicles in the city of Plattsburgh, and we're trying to do a study to see if the vehicle usage in the city of Plattsburgh are balanced out by our tree inventory of 20,000 trees, see if that's enough to take in the CO2 that we're emitting by vehicles. If we can do that, there's some cities around the world that are aspiring to be 100% zero greenhouse gas net carbon community by the year 2050. Maybe we may be one of the major cities. Well, I think the city of Plattsburgh is a major city to get there well before 2050. So that was a really good piece of news. All of the grants and awards that I mentioned, and the MLD work and the Harborside development, etc., you know, they're all tied to one theme, that we really care about our environment and our lake, and we're investing and taking care of it. The state of New York is recognizing that and helping fund most all of these. And you know, I think what Kermit the Frog used to say, it ain't easy being green. Well, we're actually having a kind of an easy time being green. Not only are we managing to be an incredibly green community, but our residents save money in doing so. We pay an electric rate about the third of what our neighboring communities pay. And when you include the electric and heating costs over the year, the cost of living in the city of Plattsburgh with all its services and its concomitant slightly higher tax rate is probably cheaper than the other areas once you factor into account all the various heating costs as well. I calculate that saves our residents between $1,000 and $2,000 a year because we have that franchise. A large business, one of our largest industrial consumers of electricity, saves over $1 million a year by being located in the city of Plattsburgh. So it just goes to prove that we can actually be very green and environmentally sensitive, but also at the same time save our residents an awful lot of money as well. So it's been a very good week for the city of Plattsburgh on the environmental front, and I obviously have to show great appreciation to Councillor Armstrong, who's been working so hard on our 58-point energy plan and our smart communities strategy and our task force.
With the help of Ethan Vinson, he deserves the major credit for the grant, really.
Thank you. That's all, thank you.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of the Common Council held on December 12th, 2019 are approved and placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office.
Moved by Counselor Armstrong, second by Counselor Gibbs. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed.
Resolved that the payrolls of the various departments of the city of Plattsburgh for the week ending December 20th, 2019 in the amount of $507,105.99 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby empowered and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Counselor Gibbs, second by Counselor Kelly. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. You have in your packet the various routine reports for the city of Plattsburgh. Since we met last, now let's go to individual committee reports, beginning with governance strategy and city operations. Councilor Armstrong.
No updates.
City infrastructure, Councilor Moore.
I didn't have any comments, but I was wondering, I saw Public Works on Protection Avenue, I think it was yesterday. I was wondering what was going on there, if they were doing some work over there.
It may be a contract let out by MLD to create a platform just in front of the transformers to allow for a couple of the dumpsters that are currently on the sidewalk to be moved to their own special location, so they won't be obstructing the sidewalk.
Good. That's what I was hoping to hear, thanks. That's all I had.
Finance and budget, Councilor Kelly.
We had our monthly meeting today with no action taken. It was a very good demonstration of OpenGov, and I'd like to thank Mr. Marks and his department for the extensive amount of work they put in. It's looks like it's going to be a great product.
Public
Yeah.
safety, Councilor Gibbs.
I have no updates.
Public library, Councilor Hensel.
No updates?
MLD board president, Councilor McFarland.
I don't have any updates other than, I do commend, Manager Tracy, for his hand in becoming, 100% energy, renewable energy. That certainly was an effort that took a lot of people, and, MLD is certainly a big part of that. So I would, commend him as well, and I'm happy to hear that, those buildings are starting to come down on Green Street. And, it was a good year for MLD, and I look forward to the next year.
Thank you. Resolve the reports as listed are hereby ordered received, and any written reports are placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office. Moved by Councilor Gibbs and second by Councilor Ensel. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. There's no correspondences or recommendation from boards at this time. Please continue.
Resolved that the bills audited by the Common Council for the week ending December 20th, 2019 in the amount of $432,465.20 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby authorized and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councilor Ensel, second by Councilor Moore. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. This time in the agenda, we ask any individuals from the public to please come address the council on items on the agenda tonight. You can find an agenda just outside the door. And there will be another public comment for general comments at the end of the meeting. Seeing none, please continue.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves the city chamberlain to authorize an additional $4,551,000 for the city to borrow through issuing long-term debt in order to provide funding for capital spending for various projects adding to or upgrading the city's infrastructure and equipment assets. The 5 bond resolutions are included as supporting documentation for authorizing this request.
Moved by Councilor Kelly, second by Councilor Armstrong. Discussion.
As Richard said last week, money's already been spent. Gotta find some way to fund it.
Obligated, and this is, the primer on this is the city authorizing going out and raising debt, issuing debt, so that we can get money in to pay for capital projects, which you authorize in a different kind of resolution for creating a capital project. So we're kind of, the cart's before the horse in this case. We should do these prior, but generally it's tougher to figure out what to bond
Right.
until you spend it, because
Right.
our projects change whole lending process that we're gonna be asking to do for 6.6 million. So, and that project goes back to 2014, so forth and so on. So anyway, there's 5 bond resolutions, if there's any specific questions.
Any further questions? Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Adoption of local law P-7 of 2019, a local law amending and restating in its entirety Chapter 278, Article 7, Section 48, subsection C of the City Code of the City of Plattsburgh. The local law shall take effect immediately upon approval by the mayor and filing with New York's Secretary of State, the entire text of which has been distributed to and read by the members of the Common Council, is hereby enacted without the reading thereof, and a copy of said local law is made part of the minutes of this meeting.
Moved by Counselor Gibbs, second by Counselor Kelly. Discussion?
As discussed, Engineer Ruff gave a pretty apt description of it at the work session. Just wanted to say that in case anyone
Right.
is watching it on
Exactly.
YouTube and they want to hear any discussion about it, then I would rewind to that.
Thank you, Patrick.
Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves that the mayor is authorized to sign a professional services agreement between the City of Plattsburgh and KAS Inc. in the amount of $8,045 to include the completion of both a Phase 1 environmental site assessment and a Phase 2 environmental site assessment, third-party air monitoring services during asbestos abatement and soil inspection services related to the relocation of the Plattsburgh Farmers and Crafters Market to the former Plattsburgh Municipal Lighting Department complex on Green Street.
Moved by Counselor Gibbs, second by Counselor Ensel. Discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves continuing the contract with Elmore SPCA for dog control services for stray and native dogs within the City of Plattsburgh for 2020 for the total cost of $11,000, and there is no increase in cost from 2019.
Moved by Counselor Gibbs, second by Counselor Armstrong. Discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves the city chamber to make the final adjustment to the 2019 budget for the city operating funds as a closing budget entry for the year. The supporting documentation detailing all of the accounts to be adjusted is included for the meeting minutes.
Moved by Counselor Gibbs and second by Counselor Kelly. Discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves that the mayor is authorized to sign a professional services agreement with Robert M. Sutherland, P.C. in the amount of $5,900 to provide subdivision services related to the downtown revitalizations initiatives, Turkey Lot, mixed-use development, and representation before city boards.
Moved by Counselor Moore and second by Counselor Gibbs. Discussion? And I should clarify, this is assistance of, the engineering firm has a great deal of experience on the site that we're currently working with Mr. Miller, and we felt that to rely on their experience to help shepherd some of the finer details of the analysis through the various boards would be a very good investment at this time. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved, the members of the Common Council request that the mayor, on behalf of the Governance Strategy and City Operations Committee, advertise for proposals for marina operation at the City of Plattsburgh Marina.
Moved by Counselor Armstrong, second by Counselor Kelly. Discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Beth, I'd like to waive a reading as on items number, unless Counselor
You
Armstrong
beat
would
me
like
to it. Go ahead.
On items number H, I, and J,
J.
please.
Moved by Counselor McFarland,
Second.
second by Counselor Armstrong. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. And discussion, perhaps we could hear from Counselor Armstrong, just very briefly, a description of
Sure.
what we hope to accomplish with these three resolutions.
Yes. Well, I mean, in the preface of each resolution, we present the justification for the policies that we're trying to enact here. In H, we're trying to introduce an anti-idling policy for city vehicles only. There's a discussion about how many, millions of tons of CO2 that are released into the atmosphere every day just by idling, that even exceeds what might happen if you turned off your car and turned it back on again. So, I'm sorry.
I think it's important, Michelle, to mention that doesn't include emergency service.
well, there is a policy for emergency vehicles that's an addendum to this policy, one that was developed by Chief Ritter, and I appreciate your input on that, Chief. Chief did a lot of research into practices in other municipalities regarding these kinds of policies, so I really do appreciate your help. There may need to be an additional addendum that applies to the fire department. I didn't hear any feedback from them, but
The one that I supplied was for the police department.
for the police department, that's correct. It breaks down the policy in terms of large vehicles of over 8,500 pounds and those passenger vehicles under that weight, and gives specific times for that you can't exceed for idling.
Why limit it to city-owned vehicles? I know other
Yeah.
places they have it for everyone.
Well, we discussed this, the mayor, Ethan Vincent, and I offered this argument that we're a very small entity, 5 square miles, and that it might cause a little bit of difficulty with incoming vehicles having to adhere to a law that's very specific to such a small entity. I welcome your consideration of broadening it. That would be, of course, more environmentally responsible. But I felt that that was something that we should try to influence as happening at the county level. Hopefully we'll be allies in that kind of action. So that's the idling. And then Ethan, the mayor, and I were working on how to make our disposal practices more environmentally responsible. So we developed 2 policies, one for recycling in government buildings. So it lays out a plan for how each government building will conduct its recycling deposits, and for public events. So I think this is a very sound first step in kind of reducing what we contribute to the waste stream and the benefits of that. And we think we're kind of like years behind, but we're making a start, so that's great.
Councilor Armstrong?
Sure.
On that issue, I think at this year's Christmas parade, you introduced the recycling area.
Yeah.
Tell us what the intent was and how it went.
Well, yes. I kind of hatched the idea that we could try it there, and thought better of it because there's not really much to collect in the dead of winter. Our main jobs as volunteers at that event were to prevent people from putting their garbage in the waste receptacles. It was difficult for the public to see that these were recycling bins we were standing beside. We had volunteers manning each recycling container that were, thanks to Ethan and the DPW, bought and labeled and produced and put up for that event. But the idea was to model how that kind of operation would take place during public events. So I think it'll take a bit of education for that to really be in place, let's say by Mayor's Cup. In this policy, it's a requirement that if you are an independent party using public space to do recycling, that you have to appoint a coordinator who works with the DPW in order to carry out the objective of getting most of the garbage that's recyclable into the proper containers. And of course, since it's city collection, we can only take that which the city collects. But the government building recycling operation takes an additional step toward collecting office paper. And I think that this will require the DPW to make an extra stop when it goes to the recycling facilities. There is a separate one for office paper, but I think we can reduce the volume of what we contribute to the county landfill appreciably. So I hope you approve it. The other is, a green procurement purchasing policy. Now, these are all climate smart community actions that we can receive points for, and Ethan and I will enter them into the portal. And so this moves us toward becoming a certified climate smart community, and that's a good thing. But this you've had copies of for I think now a month at least, and Ethan, will you help me out here and just more generally describe the process and the action that we've accomplished here?
I think the purpose of this is really to just involve the city departments as we go and procure, whether it's office supplies or going out to bid. So it includes components where implement, as part of the scoring, you set up environmental standards that are widely accepted by either governmental bodies or other agencies such as the Green Seal program. That way, so when the city departments go through and look at different materials or services they can buy, they imagine and try to incorporate environmental practices in that. And so we also want to make sure that this policy is not hamstring any of our departments, and there's ways to, if departments for either recyclable materials don't cover the same functionality or the price difference or another assortment of reasons, the departments can come up with a rationale why they chose a certain product or service over the other. So it's really just to get the departments to start considering environmental impacts of the products and services that they purchase.
Does state contract have a green seal category? So we can just look at state contracts and go, hey, this one is already certified green. That'd be really helpful, wouldn't it?
I believe so.
We'll request that, if not. Does that answer everybody's questions? Okay.
Any further discussion? Roll call on H, I, and J.
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Dowdle? Oh my gosh. I did not know where that came from. Anyway.
Yeah, we've done all of them. Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Kretzer? Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Having flashbacks.
Ooh, deja vu all over again.
Item K was added during the committee meeting. Resolved, the Common Council approves that the city of Plattsburgh will hold a public hearing on Thursday, January 9th, 2020 at 5 p.m. in the Common Council chambers of City Hall for the purposes of hearing public comments on the performance of the city of Plattsburgh's current Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, Project New NYS CDBG, Project number 927PF 141-16, Lakeview Towers Elevator with a funding amount of $300,000.
That's the new item.
Okay.
That was the new item that we brought forward from the previous committee.
Okay.
Moved by Councilor Ansel, second by Councilor Gibbs? Any further discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor Moore? McFarland, sorry. Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Moving right along.
Now, watch out for A under travel requests, okay?
Oh my goodness. Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves Environmental Manager John Ruff to attend 2020 NYWEA Annual Meeting in New York City, New York, from February 2nd through 5th, 2020, total cost not to exceed $1,850.
Moved by Counselor Gibbs, second by Counselor Armstrong. Discussion? This is an annual, you go to this one each year.
Usually, yes.
Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves one police department employee to attend the Street Smart Cop Proactive Patrol Tactics from March 23rd through 24th, 2020 in Goshen, New York. The total cost will not exceed $809.44 and will be expensed out of the asset forfeiture fund.
Moved by Counselor Ensel, second by Counselor McFarland. Discussion?
It's nice to see one of these that's not just an active shooter, it seems.
Or hostage mitigation. Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Are there any resolutions for initial consideration? Which would be somewhat moot because this is the last meeting of the year and any resolutions would die at the end of the council anyway, so.
No. You don't want to do that.
Any new business and councilor reports? Councilor Moore.
Yeah, I'd just like to read a brief statement, and it was not my intention to bring up last week's vote on local law number 6 of 2019. But after reading the spate of inaccurate statements quoted in the press, I feel compelled to reply. I, and obviously some of the other councilors, came to the meeting last week prepared to vote based on input from relevant sources and legal opinion from the city attorney. Having not heard any statements at the public hearing that I had not already taken into consideration, I was prepared to make a decision on the proposed local law, and apparently other members of the council were also. Let me remind everyone that new local laws are required to be posted, and a public hearing is scheduled 2 weeks after posting, giving council members time to evaluate the proposal and for the public to voice their concerns, after which a vote is usually held. All proposed local laws are handled in this same manner. This is local government at its best and how a legislative body should function. To be clear, the minority was heard and the majority decided. That is how our democratic form of local government is intended to work, and that is exactly what transpired last week. My second comment is I want to thank Councilor Armstrong and Councilor Ensel for their diligent work over the years. I probably had more interactions with Councilor Armstrong, and she told me all the things we talked about were debates, not arguments. But I really thank her for influencing me greatly over the course of the time I had worked with her, and the same for Councilor Ensel. I worked with him on several things, and we were very productive, and I was happy to work with him. He's an easy person to get along with. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jeff.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Yeah, I'd also like to say goodbye to Peter and Rochelle. It's been an absolute pleasure working with both of you. Also welcome to Ira and Paul DeDominicus, yes. I look forward to working with you too as well, and I hope everyone has a Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure. It really has been a huge learning experience and an honor to serve on this board for 6 years, and I've had, it's been a wild ride in many respects, and there's been moments of perfect consensus and moments of disagreement, and that's just, as you mentioned, the way it works. And the really gratifying thing is that even after coming off of a very contentious time, we come back together, we work together, and we move forward. And that's government at its best. So thank you all. It's been my
I would
privilege.
just like to kind of echo Rochelle's words too, except boy, time flies when you're having fun. And I mean that in all sincerity, that these 3 years have really flown by, and past couple of days I was kind of going back and doing some recollection of just everything that we have dealt with and faced and accomplished in the past 3 years, and look forward to the work that all of you are going to do this coming year and also down the road. And I guess, and I've said this to Rochelle, being the sole Republican on this board, I never felt like I was isolated or that I couldn't go to any of my colleagues on the council, Democrat, Independent, whatever. I think we are very much a nonpartisan board, and I think that's really the way government should work. So I think despite having our disagreements, as Rochelle said, the following week we come back and we can really build a lot of consensus, and I think Albany and Washington can kind of learn a little lesson from our little group here.
Not to be long-winded, and not that that would be the first time, I just want to add that I really invite the public to become more engaged. I think we all benefit from the feedback we receive from the public. And I would also encourage the public to, when they do engage with their public officials, that they stick to the issues, they stick to the facts, and leave all personality out of it. That's way good public debate functions best as well. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to, but I just realized something I did forget, that it's really been an absolute pleasure, not only working with each of you, but getting to know each and every one of you a little bit better. Many of you I hadn't known at all, and our paths hadn't crossed, and it's been an absolute pleasure to serve with you.
And that reminds me that I have to thank the city departments. I know we all do. I mean, I wouldn't want to get up from this seat without doing that. You do a fabulous job. I'm proud of the work our city does, the services we offer, and it's been a pleasure working with each of you as well.
Absolutely.
And I too am proud of what we've all been able to do together for the last few years. We've accomplished an awful lot, and as you said, with the help of the city departments, I mean, some of the things we're looking at financially tonight, you can see there's strong stamp and effort all over it. We've really managed to turn the city around, and we all did this together. We've made some really, really, really hard decisions together. We've taken an awful lot of flack for some of them, but I think everything is really coming together, and I thank you all for your everything you've done the last few years to make that happen.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this theme before we come to
Since everyone else has chimed in, I guess I will too. I'd just like to say thank you to my colleagues. It's been another wonderful year. I think 2017 was the hardest year I've ever experienced as a counselor, and most challenging. I was so amazed that our department heads rose to the challenge after we consolidated the work into their departments and stuck around and hung tight, and just have done a fantastic job for us over the subsequent years. I think our community development office, for example, is firing on all cylinders now, and I just so appreciate the work they do. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all the departments and all the wonderful contributions they're making. I really enjoy the budget aspect of the city council because I feel I have the greatest impact on all of our citizens, and that's our job, is to protect and better the lives of all of our citizens. So if we can continue to do things like bring in lower tax rates and be more efficient with the city's, or the taxpayers' dollars, I should say, then those are all things that help all 19,000 residents of our city. And I'm so proud to continue that process, and thank everyone for all your hard work this year to make that happen. I'm so excited about 2020 and what's going to happen. While you won't be here, Peter and Rochelle, we will remember the work you've done. We'll carry it on.
I'm sure you will.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep. And Peter, it's been a pleasure working with you. I've really enjoyed having you on the public safety. You've been really helpful and informative. And Rochelle, you've been extremely helpful to me as I've learned as I'm, went along this first year.
She's a quick study.
It is a learning process.
It certainly is. So I appreciate both of your guidance this year. And I wish you well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Big change. We'll miss you. Thank you for your work.
My wife will be happy to have me home on Thursday evenings for dinner.
You can watch us on YouTube.
Well, speaking of transitions, this may now be a nice time to appoint our new officer to the city council, common council, city of Plattsburgh. So Ira Barbell from Ward 1 would like to come forward and do the oath for this year.
Sure.
You read this and use your right hand.
I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and I will faithfully discharge the duties of Councilor Ward 1 of the City of Plattsburgh, New York, according to the best of my ability.
Thank you very much. Any other new business or additional council reports for tonight? Seeing none, this is our final public comment period for the year. Any members of the public would like to please come forward and make any public comments on any issue of mutual concern? Ms. Klepper.
Carol Pepper, 17 Couch. That was a Freudian slip. I think it's really important that, I'm glad that the ordinance was passed last week. However, I'm really concerned that there won't be enough detail and really strict enforcement and stiff penalties for violations. And I hope that this is a means to also gain, obviously, interior access, but also enforce exterior problems. And I encourage the board to work with the building inspector to develop a really comprehensive inspection checklist, like I do, or landlords do when they, have tenants move in. I think it's important when they go in, when the building inspector goes into these properties, that they go room by room and actually have something that's already computer generated that they could input and have a database. We used to have a database, and I know that Joe or whoever the chief building inspector used to report weekly, or at least once a month, I think, on properties that were problems. But there's a lot of codes that we have on the books right now that aren't being enforced, and I think that this would be a vehicle via penalties that would then be assessed. And I won't speak anymore on this because I have other issues to speak about. I live at 17 Couch. The board knows that, and I don't know why, but I continue to choose to live there. One of the reasons that the board and other people are happy and hopeful that this ordinance will bring back into line out of compliant buildings and buildings that have some major violations is that Center City is adjacent to the downtown. I lived in Plattsburgh all my life. I'm older than 60. I've lived in Montreal for 7.
Montreal has a downtown corridor, and they have buildings that are historic, and they're preserved because not only are they owner-occupied, but the ones that aren't have strict regulations and they're enforced. We've lost a lot of buildings, 72 Brinkerhoff, other buildings that are in the downtown corridor, to over-occupancy that have had violations that weren't enforced, and the board knows that. So I'm, speaking to the people that know this. But I did bring in pictures to hope that it's photographed or somehow the residents and other people in the community know why we're doing this. I live next door to 15 Couch. It's not changed, it's only gotten worse over the 6 years that it has not been able to come into compliance. I've included pictures of 15 Couch and my house, which is adjacent to it, to speak to the board about the real issues the real issues at hand. 17 Couch is the same footprint that 15 Couch originally was. The two pictures in the back are 17 Couch. And what happened was, over time, and that's part of the problem with so many of the buildings in the downtown corridor, is that over time, they were allowed to extend the exterior of the building and interior of the building to house more people, hence over-occupancy. And so 15 Couch became over-occupied, out of compliance with other issues. I think it ended up being an electrical fire, I'm not sure, but one of the girls and residents almost got killed. So we're trying to prevent things like this from happening in other buildings that are in the downtown corridor. One of the concerns I have is that I still live next door to this after 6 years. I don't know why the city can't have Tom Lattenville why the city can't hire an independent engineer to dispute the report that Aaron Ovius, hired by Tom Lattenville engineer, Aaron Ovius, to say that putting up a tarp on the east side of the building where there still are porches and railings and staircases that exist that allow animals like raccoons and skunks to live next door to where I live. I had our neighbor at Tim Wilson, who lives at 32 Broad, which is also adjacent to another building that I own at 34 Broad, had raccoons meet him at his porch 3 times in the last 2 weeks. We finally got Noah Phillips, who is the nuisance wildlife control operator, license number 2775,
Running out of time.
Okay, to come today. He said that he can't do anything because he needs permission from the owner to set the traps. He said that raccoons and skunks go into hibernation, and that the only way to get rid of them is to trap them on the property. He doesn't have to go inside the property, but he has to have permission to go on the property. I asked the board to take care of this continued blight and making us feel like we live in a war zone, and having 15 Couch be not only, if it can't be demolished right away, at least the staircases and the porches be removed, and the animal control officer get permission somehow through the council doing what they need to do to get permission to set traps to get rid of the raccoons that are actually an endangerment to our livelihood and safety and my animals. I mean, Mr. Enzel had a complaint from one of his constituents. We live right next door to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, and from my perspective, I see real value in the registry and being able to know where these properties are and have the tools to be able to do something about it. I know in our very difficult conversation last week, it seems like many of the people in the audience anticipated that the brunt of the work will come on them, who most everyone in this room last week were very good landlords of multifamily units. That's not where often the problems are. We need tools to be able to address the concerns that you're identifying and ensure that the people who are paying the brunt of these inspections are the people that are actually causing the harm. So I hope, and I know that the fee structure still has to be developed by the Common Council for the rental registry, but I really hope that the onus and the burden are on the bad actors in the city of Plattsburgh that are destroying property values in entire neighborhoods, rather than on the good actors who are trying to do a good job. And that's something that we still have some work to do and have some time to do that.
I'm hopeful, but only through strict penalties with progressive fines. That's what happened with the noise ordinance. That's the only way we're going to get into compliance. But how is the city going to take care of 15 Couch, where Tom Lattenville, the owner, has put it into corporation and the city can't force him to remove it? That's our concern. There are existing problems. How is it going to be taken? I got an extra picture. I'm not going to speak anymore. But the de Grand Prix house, this is something that's been in the family for hundreds of years. They finally moved back in. They're battling every day in their own war zone on Court Street. They asked me to speak on their behalf. I ran out of time. I asked them to attend. Next door on 65 Brinkerhoff, there's a beautiful house. They live next to this. And this is their house. It's owner occupied. The Harkness house, that's going to be under contract, hopefully to somebody good soon. Mrs. Harkness is in the hospital, in assisted living. We're concerned that that house is going to fall under this prayer. And I'll give you pictures, it's in my pile. But this is the house on 7880 Court, and this was owner occupied 2 years ago. Now it's under total shambles, it's college housing. And finally, I live on Couch Street. Thank God some of the houses have been bought by single families, but we're battling every day. This is a beautiful house now occupied by 7 hockey students. What's going to happen this in 1 year? That's what we're concerned about. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to hoping to work with you and residents to making this a better place to live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
It's kind of following up on what Carol was just saying. Many of you know that a lot of the discussion turned around the Mr. Sachs's Hummingbird home, where he had problems with the fraternity next door. And I see online now that he's kind of given up his fight. And they left, and they're now renting it out to student housing. As well.
That's a beautiful home.
The Grand Prix wanted me to ask you to speak on that. Across their house, the neighbors too, they're very concerned. What happens inside is what we can't seem to control. I'm so glad you brought that up.
So that's a little defeating, I guess, in a way.
The one on Court Street next to the doctor's office? Is that the one you're talking about?
This is the Hummingbird house on
Hummingbird
94
house.
Court Street.
Mhm.
Next to- Yeah.
I think that's an example of how blight produces blight. So if a neighborhood gets blighted, next thing you know, the next neighborhood over is blighted also. So those are the kinds of things we need to stop. And I think this new law will help with that. I'm looking forward to see what we can do with it.
But how are you going to get access before this goes on the books and it's like to be enforced? Because while they're
Mayor, this
living
isn't
there,
question and answer period.
Any other individuals like to please come forward? Seeing none, please know that this is the last council meeting of the year. We have a hiatus in between, or during the Christmas holidays, so we'll see you again in the new year, and thank you all very much. Have a great holiday season.
Motion to adjourn.
Adjourn?
Motion to
By
adjourn.
Councilor Ansel, second by Councilor Armstrong. Roll call.
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
For the last time. Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Ansel for the last time.
Yes.
Counselor Garland?
No.
No?
No, I'm fine.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
What is this? Who did we get this from?
Hey, Joe.
Joe. Thank you for everything. For that resin registry.
Thank you.
12 hours.
Hello, Mr. Rowan. Oh, they're matching glasses. Now I get it.